So, this one may be a little out there, but I feel like there was definitely something supernatural happening to me. Or, at least, that's the only explanation that I can think of. This started many years ago, so I apologize if I trail off, but I want to make sure that I include everything that I can remember. When I was around 11, I was in a horrible accident. I was riding my bike around my neighborhood, literally in that square block, like I always had. My mom told me to be home by a certain time for dinner, and I had on my watch to keep track of the time. At one point, I was rounding the corner. I looked both ways and crossed the street. The intersection I was at was on a hill, so I didn't see the car that came flying over said hill. The last thing I remember was hearing tires squealing and me telling myself that I was going to die. Then, I woke up in the hospital hooked to machines, but was quickly calmed down when I saw my mom. She explained to me a bit more as to what happened, and then broke the news to me. The way the car had hit me, and my bike, pretty much crushed my left leg, mangling it. So, I lost it. I have a prosthetic now and I get along just fine, so please don't feel sorry for me. You may not even notice if you were around me. Anyways, I found myself to be incredibly lucky and even thankful to whomever was looking out for me that day. Losing my leg will always be worth it to me so that I was allowed to keep my life. But from that day on, I started getting these weird feelings or sensations that would make me feel like something was about to happen, and I would avoid it. It may still play out, but it was like I was able to avoid any mishaps involving myself. Here's an example. One of the earliest ones I can remember, or at least remember tracking, was being outside after playing. It was hot, and I was thirsty, but I didn't want to go all the way in the house and come back outside. Instead, I made my way over to the water hose attached to the side of the house. Right before I bent down to grab it, I got this weird tingling feeling in my left thigh. I remember immediately reaching for my thigh, instead thinking that the feeling was weird. I was still a kid, and was worried that maybe something was wrong with it, or my prosthetic. So I instead went inside and told my mom. After looking it over, everything seemed to be fine, and the feeling was even gone, so we just chalked it up to maybe being a phantom pain, or maybe I was just standing funny. I got my water while I was inside and then went back out to play. A little later that evening, my dad went over to grab the hose as he was going to water Mom's garden for her. I was in my bedroom that faced the wall that the hose was on, and the next thing I know, I hear my dad shouting expletives. It made me jump up and run out to see what had happened, and I saw my dad gripping his hand with the other, turning red in the face. Apparently, there was a scorpion that had made her home in the center of the hose. The crawl space was next to the spout, and there was some loose dirt around it. So, when my dad grabbed the hose, he unsettled the dirt trying to pull it out, and disrupted her. My mom rushed him to the hospital while a neighbor stayed over to watch me and my younger siblings. I remember talking to my parents about it when they got back, because I was going to use the hose too. My dad said that he was glad it was him and not me, even though I still felt bad. It was just luck, and I decided not to mess with it, I guess. Another time, I had been in my room doing whatever I was doing, when I started to feel a bit hungry, so I went to get a snack. As I made my way to the kitchen, I took my normal path, skipped the last step down, grabbed the door frame, and kind of swung my way into the kitchen. However, I got that weird tingle in my thigh again, causing me to bring my leg further in than I usually do. Once I was in there, my mom came up behind me and shouted to watch my step, because she had just broken a glass and went to grab a broom to clean it up. She thought that she had picked up all the big pieces, but there was one that happened to land right by the entrance, and approximately where I would have stepped with my right foot. If I did, I could have stepped on it, sliced my foot open, or something. Again, we just called it a close call. I continued to have occurrences like this, and for whatever reason, it would all start with that weird pain feeling in my thigh. And some of the things were minuscule, like the glass. But then there were also bigger, more serious things that occurred. Like when I stayed at my friend's house one night when I was about 14. She had a bunk bed that she shared with her sister, but when she moved to her own room, she just kept it. She slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom. Out of nowhere, I woke up in the middle of the night fully awake, and I had no idea why. I sat up and started getting that feeling again, so I got off the bed and walked over to the door. By this time, I was starting to get used to that feeling and practically prepared myself for the inevitable. I stood there wondering if I should wake my friend up when I heard a single pop, and the top of the bunk bed fell, crushing the mattress below. I stood there fully awake, stunned, while my friend just screamed my name, jumping off the bed. I turned on the light, showing her that I was okay, but I think it assured her as well as confused her at the same time. Shortly after, her parents came in asking if we were all right and saw the bed. I didn't want to be weird, so I told them that I had just gotten up to use the restroom when I heard the sound. They believed me. It's not like it would have been possible for me to bend and crush the metal bars like they were, but it was also very strange that it happened at all. As I got older and became an adult, these things continued to happen, but I actually started telling people about them. My parents and a few of my friends were convinced that I had some kind of supernatural power going on that protected me from danger, but there was still no explanation for it. I had one when I was around 23 that was by far one of the biggest memories that is forever etched in my mind. I like to walk, a lot. I guess after losing my leg, it made me appreciate the little things like that. I thought that I would take a walk to a local cafe, hang out and enjoy my coffee, and then head back to start my day. On my way home, I pressed the button to cross the street and waited. When the signal changed to walk, I started getting that feeling again, causing me to grab my thigh and hold off on walking. As you might have guessed it, a car came barreling through that intersection, honking their horn as they approached. Now, granted, I could hear a horn in the distance, but if you asked me if the car with the horn would be going through that very intersection that I was at, not stopping, I would have told you no. I figured they were just honking at another car or something in the road. Needless to say, that one left me a bit shaken. Unlike my bike accident, I would not have survived that if I was hit. I went home and took some time to calm down. These incidents continued to unfold, and I was always left without words. Everyone around me joked about me being able to see the future. Whether big or small, I found myself one step ahead of calamity. Like the universe itself bestowed this power to me as a repayment for taking my leg, I guess? However, as mysterious and welcoming the ability was, it also did come to an end. After the birth of my child, these, I guess, glimpses of the future gradually faded. But that didn't mean it was entirely gone. As she got older, I noticed that she would do things without any real reason. Like, she would stray from her normal ritual, only for something to have happened that would have harmed her otherwise. She's 13 now, and she still seems to do it. And one thing about her, she was born with a hearing disorder, so she uses hearing aids. She's brought it up to me that she would get these weird pains in her ear, and I would assume that it was just her hearing aids. But she says that it happens when she doesn't have them in. She also explained how it happens before these events, causing her to divert from her normal path. We've talked about this before, as in my daughter and I tell her that she's special. My husband is even aware of all this, and thankfully he's open-minded, but I don't think he quite understands the connection the two of us have. To this day, I still have no explanation as to why I was given this ability. And I want to believe that it was just good luck or something, but I feel like it has to be more than that. Especially since it now affects my daughter. I may never find the answers, but one thing is for certain. I was touched by something extraordinary. Something that defied the boundaries of comprehension. This happened to me back when I was a little 7-year-old boy. My family and extended family were also close to one another. I remember always having people over at our place. We had parties for every holiday and every birthday. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, a lot of cousins. So, the 4th of July was no different for us. We were going to be hosting the cookout and celebration. I was the second youngest of 6 kids. We were a big family alone. I remember going grocery shopping with my mom, and I helped pick out some of the snack foods and desserts. My mom made the best cupcake arrangements. She was a baker/caterer, so she always went all out on the desserts. We picked out some ingredients to make what my mom called surprise cupcakes. She would make them as normal, but the center would be filled with different things, such as frosting, sprinkles, or candy. And since it was the holiday of fireworks, I wanted to try Pop Rocks. So when we got back home, I was excited to not only make them, but eat them too. However, my mom told me that I wasn't allowed to have one until after I ate actual food. I was a kid with a sweet tooth, and she knew that I would go a little crazy over them, and probably make myself sick. But that didn't mean that I understood her reasoning at the time either. So, as people started showing up, everyone was talking, snacking, and having a good time. My dad was the cliché dad, with a giant grill making everything you could imagine on it. Steaks, hamburgers, hot dogs, kebabs, beans, you name it. My parents were both pretty cheesy and cliché, but they were also wonderful. I only hope my kids nowadays think the same of me and their mom. Anyways, I helped my dad where I could, which is typically flipping things as he held me. But I more so wanted to monitor when it would be done so that I could eat and have a cupcake. When it was finally done, I made a plate and ate it a little faster than I should have. Once we were done, I was finally granted permission to those beautiful strawberry lemonade pop rock cupcakes. They were just as fantastic as you could imagine. I don't know how my mom did what she did, but I was a lucky kid. After enjoying my first one, I asked for another one and my mom told me to wait for a bit. I was kind of disappointed, but I obliged and busied myself doing something else. I played with my cousins for a while, and then we started lighting off some fireworks. After what I thought was a substantial amount of time, I asked for another cupcake. But my mom was busy talking and sorting things out, so she told me to wait. After a short pout, my mom walked back outside with the others, and I realized I was alone in the house with the cupcakes. I took the opportunity to sneak one and would eat it in my playhouse in the backyard. The party was taking place in the front yard and I had a clear path to my house. I'm confident that I could get away with it too. It went just as planned. and the little cake was just as good as the first one. But this successful plan just made me want to press my luck. So, yes, I went back for a third one. I brought it out back and started eating it when I heard someone in the house. Fearing they may notice the missing dessert, or me, I tried to eat it faster when I started coughing really hard. I had swallowed part of it wrong or something, making me choke on it. The last thing I remember was feeling very scared but also very tired until I closed my eyes. Shortly after, I woke up, and I was lying in my bed. I remember looking around my room and stretching until I remembered our cookout and party. So I sat back up, ready to go back out there with everyone else. That wasn't until I noticed a young woman standing and looking out my window. Being a little kid, I just said, "Who are you?" The lady looked over at me smiling and said that she was Becky. She then started asking about the different items in my room, and about me. She pointed to one of my shark stuffed animals and asked me what kind it was. She would ask me what my favorite one was, and complimented me on being able to name the different ones. As we talked more, she would then stop and smile at me and say things about how smart and handsome I was, and how much I looked just like my dad. It definitely made my little self feel pretty good, and I tried to offer different toys to her as a gift. She again smiled at me but declined. Then she told me that I should go back to the party because they would miss me. I thought it was a silly thing to say and just mentioned something about how I was right here in my bedroom. She again smiled and said that it was very important that I listen to my mother and get back to her quickly. So, being that she was an adult, I figured it was probably wise to listen to her, but before I went, I told her to join us. And, of course, talked about the cupcakes. She kept on smiling, but then she also looked kind of sad. She said that she might look for one later, but again pushed me to go quickly. So I shrugged it off, not really knowing what was going on. Then I looked at my door, and I could hear my mom screaming my name, which startled me. And, as if I had been dreaming, I woke up with my mom over me screaming my name and crying. Seeing my mom like that scared me and made me cry, but I noticed how I couldn't catch my breath. After a brief coughing fit, I calmed down and realized that I was sitting against my playhouse, with several people around me. My mom made sure that I was all right, and then picked me up and brought me inside. I got a stern talking to by both of my parents, because they figured out that I had taken the cupcake and they explained why it was so important. They found me unconscious and choking. Apparently, whoever had walked into the kitchen could hear my coughing, and they knew it was a kid and how it sounded pretty bad, so they went and looked around for the kid. That's when they noticed me in the playhouse, but I'd already collapsed on the ground. My face had a hue of blue and purple, according to them. Obviously, they cleared my airway and I came to, turning out fine, but it was definitely a terrifying moment for them. It was scary for me too, though, seeing how scared my mom looked. I made sure to listen to my parents for the rest of the night, but I was also too afraid to leave my mom's side. So, that was pretty scary alone, especially now as an adult knowing that I could have died, but the part my family and I still don't understand was the lady in my room. Later that night, I remembered her and asked my mom about her. She had just started naming off people at the party, but I recognized them all. I told her how I had never seen this woman before. She looked confused, but she took me to my room and said that there was no one in there. I explained how she was at my window, how she liked my shark, and how she even said I was handsome like my dad. My mom looked puzzled until I explained that all this happened right before I heard her screaming at me and woke up in my playhouse. Then her face looked more shocked than anything. As a kid, I could tell something was wrong with her, but I didn't know what. She just told me at that time that it may have been a dream when I was actually out in the playhouse, and I just left it at that, thinking it was just a crazy and real-feeling dream. The next day, while I was having breakfast with my family, we were talking about the night prior and everything that had occurred, when my mom again brought up the cupcake situation, scolding me again, but in a more light-hearted way. My dad was aware of the situation too, and he joked about it. This caused me to bring up the dream that I had. My parents were both open-minded, I suppose, so my mom immediately said, "Oh, yeah, tell your dad about this dream that you had." So, I explained it to him. The whole time he had his normal interested look as I told him, until I got to the part about the lady saying that I looked like my dad. It was clear that this had piqued his interest, so he asked me to describe the woman. However, as I did, he mentioned that he didn't recognize the woman. So, again, we all said that it was just a kind of weird dream and left it at that. Now that I'm older, my parents and I have talked about it on several occasions, trying to figure out who this mystery lady was. They, of course, would have more ideas than I would. The closest we've gotten was possibly my dad's great aunt, as the home we were in was once hers that he inherited down the family. The only thing was that the woman I saw was very young, and no one could find photos of her as a young adult. So, we've always just referred to her as my guardian angel, for possibly having saved me that night, and telling me to go back to my mother. And, since then, I've never forgotten about her. This happened when I, male, was a kid, back around 2004. My friends and I loved to be outside and explore places that we've never been. We played in the trees behind my friend's house, climbing them and making a makeshift hammock in them. We loved to find new places to explore, and had been itching to go through this old house that had been abandoned and empty for as long as I could remember. I never saw anyone on the property or anything about it change, other than the grass and weeds growing taller and taller. Then, my sweet parents, unbeknownst to them, got me a birthday gift that would push us to explore that house. I'd been wanting walkie-talkies for quite some time. I loved the idea of being able to go anywhere in the park, the woods, and even between rooms, and being able to talk to my friends. I had some cheap ones that didn't work very long, or from very far apart, and so I wanted to get a better pair. And my parents followed through. I told my friend Troy, and he came over one day so we could try out my new walkies. We were walking all over my yard and in the house, trying to see how far they would reach, and, to our surprise, they still came out clear and crisp, with him standing at the tip of the front yard and me standing at the edge of the backyard. This seemed like quite the distance for us. Enough for us to do a lot of things. And so he instantly brought up the idea of exploring that house. The house was a lot closer to Troy's place, so we planned it all out, and I was given permission to stay at Troy's for the weekend. After I was dropped off, we went up to his room to gather a small backpack of stuff that we might need. It wasn't much, and probably wasn't even anything that you would actually take while exploring, but hey, we were still kids. We hopped on our bikes. I was allowed to ride his older brothers, and we made our way to the house, telling his mom that we were going to a nearby park. Once we arrived, we ditched our bikes in the tall grass, hoping that they were hidden enough so that no one would see us. We walked up to the house, both of us nervous, and tried the door. I don't know why we were surprised when it was locked. After trying a few times, we decided to try and look for any windows that we could access, and maybe climb through instead. There were a few of them that we could reach, but they also seemed to be locked, or seized. Again, leaving us at a dead end. Now, even though we were kids and we were willing to trespass, I suppose, in order to explore this place, the thought of breaking in did not even cross our mind. We were pretty disappointed, and since our curiosity and exploration wasn't fulfilled, we thought we could at least try the backyard and see what we could find. The backyard was actually pretty well hidden by the dilapidated privacy fence, so we were surprised by what we saw. We broke off a plank that was already rotting and falling apart and crawled through. The yard was filled with different decorations, like gnomes and lights. There was a garden lined by red bricks and small fencing with those tomato stands in them. There was a small table with a dried up and cracked coffee mug resting on it, and 2 chairs tucked under the table. Then the part that got our attention the most was a small cracked stone path that led straight back through the yard to another gate. When we opened the gate, it appeared to just lead to trees. It was so dense that we couldn't really see through them. This immediately set our eyes aglow, ready to explore. We could see the trees from the front, but it didn't seem like anything we would have expected. We immediately pulled out the walkies, tested them, and agreed to head in opposite directions to explore. We probably walked 20-25 feet apart as we talked to each other through the walkies. We weren't really seeing anything of interest, other than some cool-looking trees, so we were just talking to each other, cracking jokes, and saying curse words, because we thought it was cool. But then we started getting some interference on the walkies. At first it just sounded like singing, so I assumed we were picking up a radio station or something. After confirming with Troy that he could hear it too, I told him that we should go back to the gate. Once back, we could tweak with them to see if we could clear it up and listen to it better. We were still just expecting it to be a radio station, but we were hopeful that it may have been something more entertaining. As I was walking back, I was already eager to listen, so I started flipping through the channels and listening. And, sure enough, I found one that was clearer but still had a bit of static. However, it was not a radio station, and it clearly did not sound like a phone call either. What we did hear made our blood run cold. It sounded like a woman, or maybe a young girl crying. Crying may be an understatement. She was sobbing. You could hear the hiccups and gasps of air between each cry. We both looked at each other, probably trying to read the other's expression, and carried on listening like surely this was just a prank. Maybe someone saw us or was playing with another radio or walkie and just wanted to scare us. But we couldn't stop listening. I wish we would have. The woman sobbing would then break in between and start talking. Again, the static was there, so it was hard to make out everything, but we both agreed on parts of what we heard. "I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I don't want to die. Please, God help me." Those words pierced through the airwaves, accompanied by heart-wrenching sobs. It was as if someone's very soul was crying out for us to help, drowning in anguish and fear. Troy and I exchanged terrified looks, and we knew that we needed to tell somebody. We ran back through the yard to the front and jumped on our bikes, trying to head back as fast as we could go. We kept the walkies on, hoping to still hear the woman, but it sadly faded away completely when we returned back to his house. The thought of us being in trouble because we lied didn't even cross our mind. The cries and the pleas from the woman were far too important for us. We ran inside, and I let Troy do the talking. His mom looked confused at first, so we had to slow down and explain it all to her a second time. She seemed pretty disappointed in us for lying and got pretty stuck on that. She told us that we needed to stay home and not leave the yard. We then tried begging her to go with us and explained what we heard again, but she didn't seem to believe us. She said something pretty similar to what we originally assumed, that someone was probably messing with us, and probably were inside that old creepy house. Bottom line, she refused to consider the idea that it was real and dismissed us. We went to his room and tried everything we could to get the signal back, but it was long gone. We tried playing games, watching TV, but the mood had been pretty well spoiled by our earlier experience. I couldn't help but feel this sense of guilt, knowing that we were helpless and there was nothing that we could do about it. Even when I went home, I told my parents about it, and they didn't seem convinced either. They too were disappointed that we went to the house, but while my mom did look a little curious and maybe even concerned, my dad said that what we heard wouldn't have been possible, and explained how we choose to hear things within the static. I felt frustrated and helpless. Over time, I would slowly make peace with this incident, but it was never fully gone from my memory. Some things would happen that would bring it back to the foreground. When I heard about a missing person, I thought about her. The older I got, the more I wanted answers, and I began scouring the internet and news for any information that could explain the eerie incident. I tried looking into radio interference and how it worked, and I even looked for anything about people that may have gone missing in my area around that time, or even people found, but nothing matched up. I found nothing conclusive, and no trace of an explanation. It was as if the incident had vanished into thin air, leaving me with nothing but lingering questions and a deep sense of unease. To this day, the memory of that spine-chilling encounter remains etched in my mind. The sobbing on the airwaves, the helplessness in those words, I can still hear them echoing in the depths of my consciousness. And all I can do is hope and pray that my parents were right. So, I wanted to share something that happened to me back in 2019 that I personally cannot explain. Something that left me nothing shy of shook and uncomfortable in my own home. It was in the middle of summer, and I was living alone in my second-floor apartment that was located in a sleepy suburb. It was the kind of suburb that has a lot of kids that are always outside playing in the daytime, but around 8, it goes completely silent. I've never had any issues with any of my neighbors. My upstairs neighbor is a friendly older lady, and the ones next door are a couple with some really young kids. They can all make their noise, but it's never really been disruptive or a problem for me at all. On some nights, when I had trouble sleeping, which would happen a lot, I would often step out onto my patio and just sit in my outdoor lounge chair and watch the stars. I would sit there and close the screen door but keep the glass door open and just chill in the darkness, watching the night sky as it slowly drifts past. Poetic, right? And one of those nights, it was around midnight, I was sitting out and just doing what I did when I started hearing what sounded like music. I sat up and just kind of glanced around, trying to see if I could figure out where it was coming from, because it was way too late for someone to be listening to music in the building. As I focused a bit on the music, I realized that it was old-timey music, like something from a 1940s vinyl record. It was a bit staticky and crackly, but it sounded like a jazzy tune with some piano interlaced into the rhythm. Intrigued, I decided to try and find the source. I walked back into my apartment and then opened up my front door to see if I could hear the music and where it was coming from. But when I walked out into the main hall, the music seemed to be quieter. I walked down the hall towards my neighbor's place and then up the stairs, but the music was completely gone. I went back, but when I got back into my living room, the music was still gone. So I figured it wasn't anything important and just moved on from there. Then, a couple days later, I had another late night on the patio. And as I was sitting there, I heard the music start up again. I checked my watch, and once again, it was exactly midnight. I paused and listened, and sure enough, it was the same type of music. The distinct sound of music playing from a vinyl record, complete with crackling, popping, a slight bit of distortion, but nearly clear as day. It was a different tune, but still jazzy with an eccentric piano sound in the background. I took it a bit slower as I entered my apartment to see if I could hear the direction it was coming from. And it seemed to be coming from the back end of my apartment, not near the front. Which meant that it would have had to have either been my neighbor upstairs or the one directly downstairs. The next day I went up and asked the older lady above me if it was her. Not in a way that was upset or anything, just like, "Hey, have you by chance been listening to music at midnight randomly over the past week?" She kind of chuckled and told me that she's usually in bed and asleep by 9:30, so it wasn't her. She mentioned that it was really odd that I was hearing the music, because she wasn't hearing anything, or waking up to it. I agreed, but thanked her for her time, and then went downstairs to ask the other neighbors. Of course, it wasn't them either. I wouldn't have expected a couple with two really young kids like that to be listening to a vinyl in the middle of the night. They also both mentioned that they hadn't heard any music, and he apparently worked in his office late into the night, so he would have heard it. So asking the neighbors if they had heard it was a complete bust, and I was no closer to figuring it out. Over the next couple of nights, I had purposely spent every evening out on the patio to see if I could figure it out, but the music wouldn't seem to play. Then, about a week after that, I was actually lying in bed and I woke up to the music. I immediately jumped up and listened, and was genuinely surprised when I realized the music was much louder than it had been out on the patio. I started listening harder and, sure enough, the music was coming from the direction of my hallway. And when I stepped out of my bedroom, I was certain that the music was coming directly from the spare room across the hall. Two things about this room. One, it's been unoccupied since my roommate moved out a year ago, and two, I've treated the room as a giant walk-in closet. So, the only things in there are a lamp and some clothing racks. I know for a fact that there were no electronics in that room. No radios, no speakers, and certainly no record players. I pressed my ear up to the door, and I was 100% certain that whatever was playing that music was inside this room, just on the other side of the door. I was a bit hesitant as I was freaking out, but I grabbed the handle and I threw the door open, and nothing. As soon as I opened the door, there was nothing special on the other side. Nothing playing music, and nothing unexpected. The music stopped as soon as I opened the door, like dead stopped, almost as if it had never existed. The only thing of note for me when I opened that door was that the room was very cold, like way colder than the rest of my apartment. I immediately shut the door and decided that I was just going to go back to bed and ignore it if it happened again. Shockingly, it hasn't. Like, at all. This was almost 4 years ago at this point, and I haven't heard the music at all since that night. I checked the room during the day and I confirmed that there was nothing capable of playing music in that room, so I have no clue where it was coming from. I know some people may say that it was just coming through the walls, like I initially thought, but I honestly do not believe that it was any of my neighbors, as none of them heard it, nor admitted to it. And then there's the fact that it just stopped like it did when I opened the door. As mentioned, I have no way explaining what this was, where the music was coming from, or what it meant, but I'm pretty thankful that it hasn't happened again since. A friend of mine and I decided to have a girls' day out. Life was just starting to go back to normal, or so I thought after all the COVID shutdowns. I noticed my friend was acting a little different towards me. Not in a bad way, but different nonetheless. We stop at a store and a man walks up behind me. He insisted on paying for my purchase, which was only 2 small items. I thanked him but declined the offer. He appeared visibly upset, and then asked if he could at least carry it to the car for me. Again, I declined. We later stop at a very busy restaurant. My friend tells me that people are staring at me like crazy. I then begin to notice that she was right. As we were leaving the restaurant, a man approaches me and asked if I dined there often. I told him that I stop in every chance that I get. He then says that he looked forward to seeing me again. I walk to the register and tell the cashiers that the man was so nice. They were both looking very confused. They told my friend and I that that man was actually the owner, and they had never seen him do that in all the years that they had worked for him. My friend and I got in the car to leave, and she said that something creepy was going on. I kind of chuckled, but she had a serious look on her face that I didn't understand. At the time, at least. We then stop at a Walmart, and men start following me around. 2 of them almost got into a fight over who would get some chips off the shelf that I had reached for. I walk over to my friend, who of course witnessed that scene, and we laughed it off. I tell her that it would be nice if one of the men would have been a Lenny Kravitz lookalike. Then, I swear to you, we round the aisle, and there stands a man who looks identical to Lenny, with the exception of being a little bit taller. My friend then says that that was insane, and I had to agree. I was looking through the sale rack when an elderly lady approached me. She was just absolutely darling, and she had the sweetest smile. The lady looked to be in her late 80s, and she told me that she had been hoping to see me again before she was gone from this world. She said that she'd been waiting since she was a child. Of course, that wouldn't have been possible as she was much older than I was. A much younger lady who was accompanying her tells me that the lady is her grandmother, and that she kept talking about hoping to see me again. Okay, so at that point, my friend and I are ready to get out of there. As we're on our way home, my friend suddenly asks me if I remember a classmate of ours passing away about 10 years ago. I tell her of course I do. Not only was he a friend, but he was also living with my sister's best friend when he passed. My friend had the spookiest look on her face, and then tells me that our classmate is now still alive, and apparently, according to his Facebook, had never been with my sister's boyfriend. She pulls over to the side of the road and shows me his Facebook. I went into complete shock. My friend then looks at me and asks, "What are you?" This all happened about 2 years ago, and it still gives me anxiety to this day when it's mentioned. Okay, time for another story that is unrelated to my previous story. I was recounting an incident that happened to me over a decade ago to the same friend. I told him how when I was young, I would often have alien abduction dreams, and I would lay awake in bed with the feeling of a presence in the room. This would happen on occasion as an adult as well. I'd be paralyzed by fear and be afraid to look at where I felt this presence was staring at me. Later, as an adult, I wake up and I find the most stereotypical gray alien standing at the edge of my bed and looking at me. I immediately jump up and punch it in the face. The punch never connects, and it disappears. I figure, oh, I guess it was just a hypnopompic hallucination. I've never had such a large and detailed visual hypnopompic hallucination, but was familiar with the concept, and I don't have much reason to think it was anything else. A hypnopompic hallucination, for those that don't know, is a hallucination had when you're waking up, but not completely awake, and dream content can spill into your perception of reality. Hypnagogic is basically the same thing except when falling asleep, for anyone interested in that little piece of trivia. So, my friend asks what I mean by stereotypical gray, and if I could be more specific or maybe find a picture. I think this will be easy. I've seen pictures of this particular type of gray exactly as I saw it all over the internet. And that's probably how the idea of this alien got into my mind. However, I cannot find anything that looks quite like what I saw. I remember seeing this stereotypical alien being all over the net. But the closest images, or drawings, or whatever that I look up, at the closest, look 2 steps away from what I remember grays looking like. Like, they're all based on the grays that I remember, but trying to change things to be original. I suppose since this one is just me, it can be easily written off as a memory issue, but I remember it so clearly, and seeing the depictions so often. Anyways, good news. Since I jumped up and punched that thing in the face, real or not, I've never felt the presence in the room again. I'm not scared of what might lurk in the dark. If I wake up to an intruder or presence in my room, alien or otherwise, my fight or flight or freeze response is no longer freeze. The default is fight. And I feel much more at ease laying in bed in the dark because of this. Well, hello, and lovely weekend, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope that you enjoyed this collection of some scary, unexplained stories. Stories that exist without explanation, which is kind of implied by the title of the video. Anyways, this was a collection of unexplained stories. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. I think this is my 5th one that I've done of these kind of stories. Really just some bizarre stories that don't have an outright direct explanation for the situation that occurred. I have done some pretty crazy ones, and of course this collection was no exception. These stories were definitely bizarre. I really enjoyed all of them, so thank you to those who submitted their stories to me. That's everybody. I don't have to say those who posted on Reddit. That's everybody. Everybody submitted their stories to me this time around, so thank you to every one of you. I really do appreciate it, as this was a great collection, so. Hopefully, you all enjoyed it. I did. Hopefully you did. If you didn't, that's your fault. I'm kidding. If you didn't enjoy it, I'm sorry. But if you did enjoy it, please do hit that thumbs up button, as it helps the video be pushed harder by the algorithm. You can also do that subscribe thing to the channel if you enjoyed what you heard. That's subscribe to the channel, by the way. You can also leave me a comment down below, letting me know your thoughts, what you thought of the video, how you're doing, how your weekend's going, whatever you want to leave, anything at all. I try to respond to as much as I can. I'm not the best, but I'm doing pretty good still. Just life kind of pulls me away from doing that all the time, so. Yeah. You can also do super thanks, which is just a tip to the channel. Really, just to support the channel further. Again, greatly appreciated, but never expected. There's also Patreon members. We get early access and other stuff if you so choose to join them. Yeah. Anyways, friends, I hope you're having a beautiful weekend, like I said earlier. I hope you have a beautiful rest of the weekend, and I hope to see you again here very, very soon. But until then, remember you are loved. You are valid. You are the best you that you can be. Do not ever let anyone tell you otherwise. And please, don't forget it. And until next time, much love and sleep well.